All right, welcome in. So this month, well, last month technically, in the beginning of September, we had League of Legends' first novel come out by Anthony Reynolds, Ruination. Now, this is a story that tells the birth of the Shadow Isle, so to say, and the journey of a few different characters into, the changing of the Blessed Isles into the dark misted Shadow Isles. Now, I'm somebody who loves League lore. I have family members that like books, who like the arcane. I recommended this to a family member, and I said, you know what? I'm not somebody who reads books very often, but I'm gonna give it a chance to read a book. And surprisingly, I enjoyed the book very, very much. Definitely tells its own tale, and if you're a fan of League of Legends lore, I definitely would recommend this to you. But this video isn't going to be going over the basics of what happened in the book. Now, I will put spoiler alert on this because it will have spoilers in it for certain characters in the book and maybe different plot points and where they go. But kind of the goal of this video are for people who have either one read Ruination book and want to know more about certain champions that are involved in the game, so to say, that maybe they weren't aware of at the time, as well as people who maybe aren't going to read the books but they want to know the lore story beats for champions of the game, or people who are kind of fans of the book and want to, who have read the book and kind of want to, follow up on what they read and to match the lore to the lore. But I definitely recommend it if you're a lore fan to give this book a chance and to, really, see what happens in the story of Camivore, the Blessed Isles, and even some surrounding areas. Because I think when we go through this list of 10 champions that were in this novel or affiliated with this novel, um, or hinted at in the novel, I was surprised by a few of these myself. Now, when I go over this list, I'm going to go for kind of the people who are most important to the story, down to some of the end ones, which will go by pretty quickly as kind of like one off references, so to say, in the world of Runeterra. But without further ado, let's get into the 10 champions of the Ruination novel. So, first up, the main point of view character and the main character we have in the novel itself is Callista, and I feel she is one of the ones that she definitely goes through the biggest journey, in terms of a character in the book itself. But I also feel like she's one of the ones that's very separated than what we think about when we think about Callista in the game. She definitely ends up in this, in the place, and you get the understanding of what her voice lines and what and how she feels about people who are betrayed. That as we know her, in her Shadow Isle form. But she starts out as the Princess of Camivore. Camivore being this off-continent nation, and she is the Princess of Camivore, who is the niece of Viego. But because Viego and her are about the same age, and since he wasn't really raised by his father very much, I'll go into that more in Viego's section, they really are closer to siblings. They have a very close bond. Viego puts a lot of trust in Callista and a lot of faith in Callista that she knows what's right, for him, for the people of Camivore, and just a lot of familial faith in her, as well as back the other way. Callista has a lot of faith that Viego is going to make the right decisions and come to his senses and be a really good, true king for Camivore, and not a savage, a savage style king, which Camivore is known for. Like I said, she's our main point of view character. She carries, her point of view carries a majority of the chapters in the novel, probably about 50%, if not a little bit higher. She is, seen as Viego's right hand person that he trusts the most. She goes on a mission for Viego that has her ending up finding the Blessed Isles, and comes back and ends up leading to Viego to the Blessed Isles where everything goes wrong. Um, One thing we learned from the very beginning is she's betrothed to Hecarim, who is we'll go in later is a leader of the Iron Order. She's not too sure what to think of him at first and throughout the novel, but I think by the end she becomes very head on to what she feels about with Hecarim and the choices that he makes with her, to her in the rest of the novel form. She's definitely more kind and thoughtful. When you think of Callista and you think of a warrior princess going in, I wasn't expecting her to be so soft sided. She wasn't one who was looking for massive bloodshed. She was really trying to think about what the main population, what the poor population was like, and she had a real connection with Isolde about doing things that are right for the people and not just gaining riches and stuff like that for Camivore. She still had a military sense of mind, but as a character coming in, I was very happy and very surprised to see just how kind and thoughtful she was for the main people of Camivore, and isn't what I think you generally think about when you play her in the game in certain ways. She is definitely the positive good character of the story, the moral high ground character all the way through. And the big thing she is she's the general of the host army, which that is the army of Camivore filled by all the common people, so to say. So she's the individual who, trains and really commands a very strong and powerful host army, which when you definitely turns a lot of people off in Camivore because places, Hecarim, the Iron Order, and there's other kingdoms that have their own professionally paid armies and stuff like that. So the fact that Callista is able to make the host army so strong, very loyal to her, she's very loyal to them, is something that puts her in different, in a respectful but very difficult place in Camivore. And the other big thing is her closest connection through the whole book to a character was to her right hand person of the host, Ladros. I think people who play Legends of Runeterra know all about Ladros, but they have a very close bond. And without going into spoilers, they have a pretty close connection throughout the novel. And they very much, Ladros is very much loyal to Callista no matter what. And Callista, her own way was very loyal to Ladros and making sure, she put him in the best position possible for him. But Callista goes through all that. She's very, her biggest flaw was her trustness, being trustful of Viego and Hecarim in different areas. And she ends the story being pretty much betrayed by both Viego and Hecarim, and that sets up her, post, when she comes back, from the Shadow Isles, basically having death to all betrayers. She is really out there to seek vengeance on anybody who has betrayed others in the world. Another fun fact, though, is when she was on the Blessed Isles originally, she had met up in her adventures with Jendakaya, who is the leader of the Sentinel Division on the Blessed Isles. She saw Jendakaya make the weapons from the runic rocks, and whenever Hecarim was betraying her, and Callista was trying to hold off Hecarim's Iron Order from going into the living waters on the Blessed Isles for trying to stop Viego from taking Isolde there. Jendakaya was ready with her weapons to stand guard with her small host army, and die with Callista. But Callista, mentioned that her and her weapons were much too powerful and much too important to this world to have her die in battle here. And she directed Jendakaya to leave the battle and to escape the Blessed Isles before the Ruination itself happened. So the only reason why we were able to get Sentinels to come back and stop Viego really comes down to Callista's decision to put the value of Jendakaya's life and her research much further than the importance of stopping Viego. And that's something that comes out in the lore of the story that I thought was very interesting. And it's kind of a cool connection to think about, as death to all betrayers. Who ends up taking out Viego in the end are the Sentinels, and the only reason why they were able to live on was because Callista had their leader leave the island with a couple of her pupils. Otherwise, all of the Sentinels, all of the Sentinel studies would have been lost. So that kind of wraps up Callista here. Again, she's a very main point of view character. She's very faithful to her uncle Viego as king. She trusts him greatly. She's very loyal to the host army. She has a great connection to the captain that sails her all around looking for the Blessed Isles, Venix. Just a very fun character. I love her quips. She has definitely personalities. She's somebody who grows a whole lot. Kind of goes from a naive, believing the best in people to being understanding that she needed to be a realist and she needed to make her stand early on. But yeah, that is Callista in the Ruination novel. The next champion that we're going to go over goes by the name Erlich Grail, or as we know him in League of Legends, Thresh. So Erlich is the second most popular main point of view character. We get to see where he comes from on the Isles themselves. We start out with basically the prologue to the novel is Erlich Grail believing that he's going to be put in the highest order of the Blessed Isles because he's so smart, he's so advanced, he knows the most, he's the most successful. But unfortunately, that spot was given to a Master Tyrus, who we will get to later on in this breakdown. Instead, Thresh was chosen to be becoming, was the last one left, and was ordered to be a part of like the lowest order of the Blessed Isles, which are the Threshers. Now, Threshers are individuals who hold lanterns and basically walk the vaults of Helia, which is the main capital of the Blessed Isles. They're very much underground. They don't really see daylight. And Thresh, and they are guarding all of the ancient texts that are locked up. They're making sure nothing's being stolen, things like that. But these are almost gigantic mazes down there where the Threshers are. And Thresh is somebody who's after being there for 20 or so years, understands almost where his route and what it's like in the dark. He knows the different areas. Things happen and he ends up getting access to different type of stuff. And he's somebody down there just looking for more and more ways to get power. He's very vengeful on the masters, feeling that they're holding all the power to themselves, and and he's being sentenced down there just to be, to die and to be forgotten about, like so many people are down there in the dungeons. In the not dungeons, but they're very dungeon-like stuff. But he's a very cruel, mean person. Now, like I said, while performing his Thresher duty, he gained a lot of valuable information about secrets of the Blessed Isles. And he was somebody who is very intellectual and very smart. And he knew how to find these little, these informations, and he gains an important artifact that, ends up being a major player in the story. Again, I'm not going to spoil too much of the book plot. I really recommend people go do the book. I'm just doing this video because nobody has really explained the different characters of the Ruination for people, the Ruination novel for people who might not read it, that are really, wanting to know about who is in this book from League of Legends lore. But even I think knowing this, I think a lot of our, knowing, we know who Thresh is as a League player. So I think knowing, these characters doesn't spoil too much in what happens. But yeah, Thresh is somebody who was, gathering more and more useful information in the Blessed Isles. And, at one point when he was searching, he ran across Rise, who I will get into in my next slide. And because at the same time Rise felt in a similar way, they did work together and cross paths, which I kind of wish that in the future that Riot would add some voice lines if they haven't already with Rise and Thresh's interactions, because they very much know who each other are, and at least Rise very much, knew at the time who Erlich Grail was and what he caused. So I would love some actual lore interaction in the character dialogues between the two with voice lines, because they do have a large portion of the second half, the second third of this novel, interacting with each other, and working together on the same page. And I'm pretty sure this is going to lead me to, oh yeah, and the last thing I'll say is, Grail and Thresh was really all about himself. Even as he was using Viego to lead him to the waters of life, that the masters were hiding and defending away. He was talking about betraying Viego. He was thinking about using his sickle to cut Viego down, all of that stuff. But he was very much a character that was just using everybody for the means to his end, which I think matches the Thresh we know in the lore very, very much. Very self, just cares more about himself than anything else. But here we go. I think that's going to lead us to, not Rise. We'll save Rise for a few slides later. I should have put him here. But we're going to go over Viego now. Now, Viego, he was never meant to be king, and he wasn't raised as such. Very beginning of the book, we're told that Callista's father was actually meant to be the king, but before he got a chance to be on the throne, he passed away, and that his father never really gave Viego much attention, never taught him the ways of the court, never told him the expectations of the kingdom, and because Viego's brother was killed before his father passed on. And it was really close. Like, his brother and his father passed pretty quickly, but Viego was never raised and never taught how to be a king in this position of power. So when he came in, he kind of came in as a early 20-year-old, maybe even late teenager type of an individual. Somebody who clearly wasn't ready for this throne, wasn't ready for this power position, was highly susceptible to influence. And I thought that was an interesting bit of lore and story that we don't get, that we don't necessarily see from his character in game. But it's definitely a big character trait of Viego, and knowing where he is and why things ended up the way they are. A cool little fact is the Blade of the King, or the Blade of the Ruined King, like in the game, is called Sanctity. And his opening sequence in finding out if he's going to be able to be the king, he has to prove that he can hold Sanctity, because it basically binds itself to somebody. And if you aren't able to bind with it, it kills it. It is able to kill. It'll just kill the person attempting to soul bind to it. Now Sanctity is not actually in the physical world per se. Like, it's something you can carry, but it was made in the astral plane. So that's why maybe when we see things like a soul or other beings hold on to it that maybe not be fully a part of the mortal realm without dying. I think that's why that happens, but they make it very clear that it's part of the astral plane, and it allows Viego to summon it at a moment's notice. He doesn't have to have it in his hands. He doesn't have to have it with him or anything. Whenever he feels like he needs to summon the blade, it basically comes to him and it appears to him. Which I think was really, really cool. I think added a lot of lore to the blade itself, and I think it gave a lot of power and understanding of Viego and the Kingdom of Camivore, and why it's so important and so recognized, for him to be king, in that type of a way, because he was able to hold the blade. He didn't die. And they mentioned in the beginning that people were like, it's like a 50-50 flip chance of he'll survive or he'll be able to hold the blade. I think that's another reason why Callista was so, believing that Viego was going to be a king, making the right decisions, because the blade had allowed him to be chosen. All right. Now, we learned in the very early on, he was actually a very kind king. He listened to the counsel of Isolde and Callista. He wouldn't do things that would, maybe make him look stronger and better, but was doing things that would help people out and was very caring of people and was really caring of Isolde. He really wanted to make her happy, and that was his MO in the story. But unfortunately, when Isolde went mad, he didn't even believe it. Like, it was very obvious that Isolde was dead, but he went mad. The kingdom went to wreck. He let people like Hecarim take advantage of everything, and he sold all of Camavore's riches. Viego just went full on mad, and for the rest of the story, you know, he was just exactly he was a mad, uh, upset king trying to find a way to bring his wife back and not accepting that she was dead. He still felt that she was clinging on to life. Now, I think another cool fact, little like lore fact about Viego in the story is he had mage powers. He was able to, make people move. He was able to make things move and come to him. And even Erlich Grail mentioned, was surprised when he saw that Viego was able to use mage like power. So it's something that was very rare. In Camivore, it wasn't something that was common, and really in Camivore, besides say Rise, he was really the only one that in some of the masters, but he was the only from Camivore's side that had showed any type of arcane abilities. Um, so I also think that's an interesting thing with Viego, and I think it explains some of his powers that he was able to keep post Ruination, and what we see in the game. Now, next up, we have Hecarim. Hecarim, he was betrothed to Calista. That was kind of his main story. He was always trying to find ways to make her happy, but keep himself. He was trying to make her happy and backing her up, but also he was still very much focused on putting himself in a power position. He was the head of the Iron Order of Knights in Camivore, which was like the closest, kingdom slash town or something. That's what my understanding. They were known as the strongest army that the Camavorians had, their closest allies. He was he's very much the belief. He very much held the beliefs that we need to be powerful. We need to show power. We need to attack people to show that we're not weak. And he led the Iron Order in that way. He was very ruthless. Like I said, he believed in the old Camavorian way of raiding those other countries nearby, taking their goods, and using that to feed yourselves and to boost your own economic, positives. Strength through power was definitely the old Camavorian way before Viego, and it's something that Hecarim truly believes in and showed throughout. Um, they mentioned at one point that Ladros mentions to Callista that Hecarim potentially became head of the Iron Order through nefarious means. It's heavily implied that Hecarim killed somebody or killed his way to the top. We never fully got confirmation of this, but given what his character is like in the story, and the moves that he makes, this wouldn't surprise me at all. He seems very, he has very much has a goal in mind to give himself as much power as possible. So it's more than possible to know if he was able to, he found his way as the head of the Iron Order through basically killing those that were previously in charge. At the end, though, he does follows Viego's orders and he turns against Callista and ends up taking her down and basically becomes who we know later on. But now we're on to the third point of view character of the story, and that's Rise. Rise here is the third point of view character, and if you asked me pre-reading this book who's somebody that would actually start surprising me as being people that were involved in the story or heavily involved in the story, Rise would be way up there. I did not expect Rise not only to be mentioned in the story, but to be such an important character to the novel. So we find out that Rise, I'm pretty sure he came from the Freljord. I think they mentioned he came from the Freljord. Either way, he became very nomadic with life, moving from place to place, and he was he was a thief that struggled to find his way in the world. He was very clearly on. He had these runic powers in him. They mentioned that the runes and the power kind of burn him from within. And in the novel himself, he's only a teenager. So he's somebody who is really just trying to find his way in the world, and in his thieving journeys, he was found by Master Tyrus, the person that took the spot that Grail thought he was meant for. Whenever he was thieving, and Tyrus took him as his apprentice. Now, Tyrus was an individual who would, you know, go out and try to find artifacts and bring them back for the Blessed Isles that they deemed too powerful for the Runeterran world at the time. And Thresh, being his apprentice, they were found by Callista in a sea battle that was pretty cool and interesting. Again, go read the book. I highly recommend it. If you haven't read the book, give it a chance. The audio book has the actual voice cast of most of these characters, as well as the it's only about 400 pages, but so from that point on, we get introduced to Rise, and I thought he was just gonna be a minor background character, but he ends up finding his way um, into the story more whenever he became frustrated because his master, you could tell he wasn't he wasn't teaching Thresh how to control his power. You could tell very early, very much that Thresh was in pain. He was struggling. His power really fluctuated with his emotions. When he was upset and mad, his power and the runes would kind of burn in his skin and would burn him from within. So he grew very frustrated that Master Tyrus wouldn't teach him what to do with his power. So he decided to go into the locked dungeony underground area where all the texts and everything are held for Hellia and the Blessed Isles, and he stumbles upon Thresh. Now Thresh was ready to kill Rise, but he learned that Rise had powers of runes, um, and because of this, there was something that him and Thresh would work together on that would lead him to basically he made a deal to where he would confirm the existence of the waters of life for Thresh in exchange for Thresh letting him live and giving Rise books that teach him how to use his rune, being the magic, the rune magic that is kind of flowing through his veins and pushing out of his body. And doing this, they both feel like they've been slighted by masters above. They both felt like that they weren't being treated respectfully. But over this over this partnership, Rise really learns that Thresh, or like Grail, is not a good person, and where Thresh is, where Rise is looking to do stuff for himself and to try and not kill himself with this power. Grail is doing things for out of vengefulness and wanting to make his own personal power and stronger, and not caring how it affects others. They become very much foils of each other in the second half of this novel. Um, you know, and Rise is somebody who, when you come into him, he's a very arrogant teen. He thinks because he's special, he thinks he should be given lots of stuff. But he leaves this journey kind of understanding his importance with the power, his runic power that he possesses. And he very much realizes that he made mistakes that caused the ruination to happen. He was the lead, he was the main person that connected with Erlich Grail, that was able to give Callista confirmation of certain things that she ended up, Viego ended up finding out. And he proved to Rise that even that what he was looking for actually existed. So he feels very guilty of that, and he understands his importance in the world. And him and Tyrus end up on a much better understanding, where Tyrus now understands that he needs he needs to teach Rise these powers, and he can't just try to suppress him, his knowledge, because he might be dangerous. And Rise shows maturity and is meeting Tyrus halfway, and knowing his and reading the ancient history novels and stuff like that. But Rise is a character who very much I was surprised to see in this book, um, and he is somebody who grows very much as a character to where when you come in, he's not the individual you see from the game, obviously. And even though he isn't ending as the individual we see from the game, somebody who is looking to find all the world runes to keep them from people, you see his character journey and his arc starting. And I would love it if we got a Rune War novel, because they mention it, and slightly in the in the epilogue, but Rise was such a great character in this story, and I learned so much about him. And I only want to know more and more about his journeys through Runeterra. And something happens in here that may or may not, be the reason why he's able to live for the thousands of years that we know him as. And there's certain things that happen on the Blessed Isles with Helia that also directly relate to Rise and kind of his journey and where he goes. So, but no, that's kind of Rise overall. Such a great character, such a great importance into the story. Loved seeing his point of view. Again, the biggest surprise of the novel by far was he was not on my suspect list as a main character, and this story did so much of him justice, and added so much more to his lore than we know already. And another character that was a surprise that showed up, Soraka. Again, if you ask me about characters on the Ruination story that I didn't think would show up, like I said, there's a lot of them, but Rise and Soraka were two, and I'm surprised that they got talking lines and they were heavily, they were decently involved in the story. Now, while Rise was the main point of view character, Soraka was something else. She was known on the Serpent Isles as a prophet of sorts. She was like a seer. She could, she can give people, there was rumors that she was out there giving advice, of what can be or what can't be. There's actually a connection to Zahn with Callista, that works with Callista, and that gets Callista to see Soraka. But yeah, no, I was not expecting, when they were talking about the seer and seeing this individual, this prophet, from the Pharaoh's clan member that was guiding Callista, I did not have Soraka on my radar. But no, she was on the Serpent Isles in an area that she mentions, to Callista, that will become a place of thieves as time goes on in the future, and how that saddens her. Now, we all know what that means. She's confirming that where they're at is going to become Bilgewater. So Bilgewater hasn't really been built yet. You do have the people that the priestess people of the sea that we know Alawi from. But the actual Bilgewater, the piratey land, that Bay of Trade hasn't actually shown up yet. So that was a cool little reference that Soraka makes. But basically, she meets with Callista and she explains while she cannot see the future, she sees different paths that people can choose. So she basically told Callista, you have two paths. You can forget about finding the Blessed Isles and spend the rest of the life with the person you love. You'll be happier, you'll have kids, or you can go on this journey, and she mentions a certain thing that will lead her to the Blessed Isles, but things will not be good if that happens. Basically, she warns Callista that is a very dangerous route to take. She doesn't straight up tell Callista what it's going to be, but she heavily implies that while the honorable choice of finding the Blessed Isles would lead to much pain and suffering for Callista and those around her. But very majestic, very well thought out, very good, wise voice. She had a different tone, so to say, her celestial self, but she was really surprising to see in there. Now, when it comes to the Ruination event that we had on the League of Legends actual main page, one of the biggest criticisms was, where's Yorick? Yorick is a big player in the current day Shadow Isles war, and I'm happy to say, while he doesn't play a big part in the story here, it is confirmed that he makes an appearance. when Viego is consulting the Masters when he's on the Blessed Isles about Isolde, and they're basically saying like, "What do you? Is this a joke? She's been dead, for months. Why is she? Why is he here? We can't fix this." Um, Viego's upset. He doesn't believe it. He doesn't believe it. And Yorick, who is known to, the Masters say this is a priest um, who is a grave digger that has a connection to the dead. Um, you know, just telling him in passing, he asks to speak to Viego, and he basically, again, he's not mentioned in name, but the author said he appeared in the book. He mentions to Viego that um, Isolde is happy and in peace. That all she wishes that he take care of her dog Gwen, who we'll get into later on here, and that she loves him, and he wants her to live on in her memory. At this point, Viego was like, okay, this priest is Yorick here, the priest is telling the truth, because at that point nobody in the Blessed Isles or even around knew who Gwen was to Isolde. So the fact that he was able to mention Gwen by name gave Viego the belief that he was communicating with her in the dead, and that he was finally accepting that she had passed, and he was starting his grieving process. Now Thresh comes in later, comes in later and changes things, but Yorick literally had the Viego to the point where he was ready to leave the Blessed Isles, and go back and mourn the loss of his wife, and maybe move on in a much positive way. That obviously would not have the ruination happen, but might go back to try building Camivor up in ways that reminded him of Isolde, and being a positive king. Um, like I said, he was able to communicate with Isolde, talked about Gwen, which the next champion that was mentioned quite a few different times in the novel, Gwen. Now we all know her in League of Legends lore as a part of Isolde's soul, that was sent out and um, turned Gwen into an animated life form, that had the powers of the Hallowed Mist. But here, she's still just a doll in the story. She's nothing, she's not a character that talks, breathes. She doesn't turn into herself here. She's just a doll. She was mentioned a few times by Isolde. I think she mentioned her in a couple of her letters to Callista. At one point, when she was weak, before Callista went out to search for the Blessed Isles, she had Viego go and find Gwen. So Gwen was very much mentioned. And then, like I said, Yorick mentioned that she wanted Viego, to put to put Gwen with her, and to make sure Gwen was okay, and that was Yorick's connection to showing his powers were real, and confirming to Viego that he was probably was speaking to Isolde. But yeah, that was kind of Gwen's whole story here. She was mentioned in a few different ways. It was really cool to kind of see her and really see the importance that Gwen had on Isolde, and it makes a whole lot more sense why part of Isolde's kind of soul found its way to Gwen and gave her that hallowed mist power form, and form as she was in the game. Um, Again, she was probably, we're getting to the end here where these characters were either hinted at or were background style stuff in the novel. But Gwen was definitely cool to see Gwen in here. The next kind of background character that I can't confirm because it wasn't given a name, but I'm pretty sure was in there, was Maokai. Now, when Callista was waiting to figure out if the Blessed Isles would go and help Isolde out or not, or in Viego, she was walking around their lead city, Helia. At one point, she was kind of going towards the end of the city in more of the farmlands, and she came up on a forest. Now, while staring at the forest and stuff, she was like, I could swear I'm seeing one of these trees move in the forest. And she thinks about it for a little bit. She shrugs it off and she leaves. To me, this was pretty much the writers putting in there Maokai, mentioning trees moving. Like Callista was very certain that she saw a tree moving and almost having a face like a figure. Um, we have no confirmation in the story of this was Maokai or not. I hadn't, in the AMA on the Reddit, I hadn't had a chance to ask the author if that was indeed Maokai the story, but um, I'm pretty confident that that was Maokai. They definitely made a point for her to see, tree moving, a face-like figure. Um, little Easter egg stuff didn't add or detract from the story, but pretty much I think this is them confirming Maokai in the story of Ruination, and I'm using him as part of my, the ninth of my 10 champions in here, as somebody who made an appearance or was talked about in the Ruination novel. And last but not least, Zillion was mentioned in the Ruination novel. He was merely just a mention when when Viego and his advisor Necrit were trying to look for ways to save Callista. One of them was talking about a agent mage who was known to potentially cure or had magical powers to turn back time or something like that. And they mentioned Zillion, and Viego was wondering where we might find this person, and Necrit was like, I don't even think he exists. He just is kind of like a myth in the I believe in the Shuriman area. So yeah, it was kind of cool seeing Zillion be mentioned in that type of way, and somebody who has his story in the world of Runeterra has as far enough reach to reach Camivore, a whole separate continent, than the main Runeterran continent that we know about in the actual regular lore. But yeah, those were the 10 champions that I saw, being referenced or being seen in the Ruination novel. If you kind of like, the little minor details, the lore details, again, highly recommend you go check out, the novel itself. It's not too expensive to buy the digital copy for a phone or a tablet. The audiobook, again, is very, very good from what I hear, having the voice cast. The book itself, I've heard, has lovely, cover, has lovely pictures and stuff like that involved there. I thought the story was very good. I think we saw a lot of characters' lore and where they came from and understanding where they came from a lot of different ways. There was more champions than I imagined that would happen. And because I haven't seen other people cover this all too much, I kind of wanted to make my own video here, just listing the 10 champions of the Ruination novel, breaking down what their part was in the story, so to say, and some of the highlights of their story with their lore going forward and what happened. If you're somebody new who doesn't know anything about League of Legends and lore, but like the Ruination novel, so you clicked on, leave a comment down below if you have any other questions. If you're looking for anything else about the story or other League ways, I'll answer in comments and recommend different short stories and stuff with League lore and characters that I think would make great novels of in the future. And if you guys have any other questions about the book, leave them down below, your thoughts and stuff like that. But thank you for stopping by. I don't know if I'll make more videos like this or not. This is kind of again, I didn't even see Necrit make a video about this. He's too busy talking about the 2022 world situation. So I really wanted to put out there these main 10 champions, so to say, that we saw here. And again, those slight spoilers in here. But I really do recommend people go read the novel and fall more in love with these characters. And who knows, maybe you'll have a different attachment to different people and understand them different ways. But until next time, I'll see you later. Bye.